All right, so we're here with my pal Jack Ryan, or you know what? I don't even know what I should call you. Like my dad used to do, and I've done this with a few other guests, and Jack, you'll do the same way. When I played Little League and Pop Warner football, we'd all get around in a circle and we'd say, introduce yourself to your teammates and what you'd like to be called. So, for those who don't know, introduce yourself and tell us what you'd like to be called.
I always feel like I've kind of had an identity crisis when it comes to my quote unquote stage name because I've been so many names in my career. It's crazy, but my real name is Jack, and I'm gonna say it's just Jack, which is ironically my very one of my very first radio names was just Jack, and I always hated it, but it always seemed to kind of stick. But for all intents and purposes, you can just call me Jack.
Will and Grace fans will get that reference. Some of you younger listeners have no idea what Jack just did. I did get the Just Jack reference. Very good. All right.
Well, the funny thing is I had no idea what that was in reference to
You didn't
because
know either?
it was my manager at my first job in radio that gave me that name, and I didn't get the reference.
There's a good tip. If you're asked to get a name in radio, look up what the name is before you say yes to that name. There's a lesson out of the gates for my pal Jack. All right, so Jack, take us through where you grew up. What was the first job you wanted as a kid? And if that job when you were a kid changed by the time you were 18.
Yeah, sure did. Man. So in the beginning, I'm from Buffalo, New York. Not the city, the suburbs. I've literally lived all over Western New York. So diehard Bills fan, diehard Sabres fan. Very sad about the Bills, but there's always next year. Um, but with that said, I had always been into radio as a kid growing up. I think a lot of that came from my mom, who always had the radio on. She always had talk radio on, ironically. It's like news talk radio. So I grew up listening to news talk radio, which is kind of weird because I don't really listen to that anymore. But I think it kind of established the roots and the passion of like, wow, these people are talking on the air and they know what they're talking about. And there was just something about that just kind of I always gravitated towards. And aside from that, I also listened to a lot of music radio growing up. So growing up in Buffalo, the station I always listened to was Kiss 98.5, Janet and Nick in the Morning, which they are still on the air to this day. And they're great people too. I've gotten to know them over the years. So I always loved radio. I always used to pretend to do radio shows in my bedroom as a kid growing up. I remember my mom, again, she kind of started this passion. She got me this, it was like this little toy. It was called a DJ radio made by Planet Waves, I think it was. You can just do a Google search for it. You'll see it. It had a little tape player in there, cassette tape player, a teeny tiny microphone, and it broadcast about 15 feet on an AM frequency. So that was my very first radio show. I made my own station. I had music that I played off a CD player. I played the Three Doors Down first album. That was I played those songs all the time because that's all that I had. And as far as my music catalog at that time, and I remember broadcasting a parade that used to go down my street that I lived on growing up. It was like the 4th of July parade or something. I sat out front with a buddy of mine in the neighborhood I lived in, and we did a play-by-play of the parade. So yeah, that was kind of my first dip into radio, but I never really thought of it as a career until I got to college. And ironically enough, I went to college for computer engineering in the very beginning. Went to Alfred State College, which if you don't know where Alfred, New York is, it's in the middle of nowhere, but it's a really, really cool place. I got a lot of love for it because I spent many years there, kind of letting this passion develop. And so I was there doing computer engineering. The big dream was always to work at NASA. I love space. I love science. I'm a geek. I love Star Trek. So like I always wanted to go into space. I thought about joining the military for a while. I was in a program called the Sea Cadets in high school, which is kind of like Boy Scouts for the Navy. Went to boot camp, did all that stuff. So like I was really dead set on joining the Navy and making it to NASA. And I wanted to go to college first because I thought that getting a degree in computer engineering might be a good step into that. I've always kind of been a tech geek at the same time.
So yeah, so take us through that. So now you're doing your computer engineering. You want to go to NASA. You want to go into space and be an astronaut. What changes? What happens next?
All it took was my freshman orientation at Alfred State, and I walked past the radio station. I'm like, I'm hooked. I got to do that. And it's funny because like when I think back to it, I still remember that to this day. I walked past the studio. There was no one in there. The lights were off, but you could see through the window at like the equipment was like had like a dim light on it. You know, like the lights on the buttons were glowing, and the microphone like sound meters were going. I think the computer with the automation was on. And so I looked through the window into this dark studio, and I saw those little lights flickering, and I saw the microphones kind of sitting there like mine is right here in the video if you're watching. And there was something about it that just drew me to it. I'm like, wow, I got to do this as a club because it's a club on campus. So I got to do it. Still not thinking that I'm going to be doing this as a career. I needed to do something fun because, you know, it's your freshman year. You got to find stuff to do, make friends. So I looked into it and I joined the club.
So there is a transition though, because I know you very well. You're talking about your time at Alfred. You're doing the stuff at Alfred. Isn't there a transition where you end up going to Oswego? And if so, what happens in that transition?
So that was a couple years later. So I did spend a little too much time at Alfred.
Well phrased, my friend. Well done. Like Van Wilder. We call those people doctors. Are you Dr. Jack Ryan? We can reset the podcast if we need.
I mean,
a doctorate.
For the amount of time I was in school, I could be a doctor. That's the thing. And my student loans are very reflective of that as well. So I mean, it took me a while because like that dream of working at NASA and going into space was so huge for me, and I wanted to do that so much that I was kind of like I hated my classes. I got to a point I wasn't even going to class, and I almost flunked out. And at the same time I was doing that and trying to get through that computer engineering major, I was thriving at the radio station. At that point, I'd become general manager of our college station, WETD. And like, that's all I wanted to do. I poured my heart and soul into that. I had a morning radio show. I was, you know, making my own imaging, which imaging is kind of like the sound that you hear between the songs. If you listen to a radio station, you hear like, you know, the station voice. I made my own stuff with my own voice on my own radio show. I got music to play in between the songs that kind of made it sound like a real radio station. And so it came to a point where I had to make a choice because I was not happy and my grades were just going down. And so I remember the day I sat in the back of the studio and I took a deep breath and I said, you know, I just don't think that is what I'm supposed to be doing right now. I need to pursue this because this is what I love to do. And it was hard. It was really hard. It was kind of a reality check. And then I finally just went for it. And around that same time too, I had also two things that happened. I met my now wife at Alfred. We started dating on campus, and she had actually come in as my producer on my radio show. She did the news for me while I played the music, and we chatted, got to know each other. So her and I got real close. We started dating, and I was offered my very first internship at a radio station in Hornell, New York, which is now a country station. At the time, it was kind of 90s to now type of format. And I remember that week that I almost dropped out of school because I was going to flunk out. My grades were terrible. I didn't think I could do this. I wasn't ready to make that choice to just change my major. And I had decided that, you know, I didn't want to leave my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and I didn't want to let go of this opportunity of getting my first internship in radio. So I just went for it and never looked back. And yeah, so
amazing, man.
That was like the end of chapter 1.
Yeah, man. So like you make this transition. So now you're feet first into it. You're going to be a radio guy. You're going for something you're passionate about. You're putting the space missions in the back burner for now. You mentioned that first internship. Just I want to ask a question about the future in a second, but just to go back. You got the internship just through a connection through the station. Did you reach out to somebody? How did you get that first internship?
So it was actually someone at my college. So the radio station was in like the student union. I forget exactly what it was called, but it was the building where all the clubs were and all the student activities building. That's where it was. The secretary in that building, her best friend did the morning show on that radio station in Hornell. She was looking for an intern. And because I had gotten to know this person in the student activity center, she, you know, she said, "Hey, my friend, she's a morning show host in Hornell. She's looking for an intern. Are you interested?" I'm like, "Heck yeah." So, and I remember too, like the first time I sent in that first tape, air check, we call it, like a demo of what I sound like on the air. And I sent that in. I was so nervous. Like I'm even now like shaking thinking about it. Cause like I was so nervous. Like I wanted this so bad. And I mean, this is where the doubt starts coming into, because, you know, you and I may be a little different in that aspect. I do have a little bit of doubt in my mind at times. I always ask myself, like, am I good enough? Like, can I do this? And I did it, and she loved it. And she's like, "When do you want to start?" I'm like, "As soon as possible. Let's do it."
I just want to sit on that doubt thing you said right there, because even guys like Jack and I, or you listening right now, maybe you're going through this grind and you're just hoping for that opportunity. Never forget like what this is: radio, television, writing, media, business. Some of these fields, and especially like a media field, is still preference. It is, for lack of a better term, art. Like you could listen to a stand-up comedian and 5 people find him funny and 5 people don't find him or her funny, and be like, they're the same jokes. I mean, what do you mean? Like, you can go look at a photo and somebody, or a picture, and someone could pay $1 million for it, and other people would say like, it looks like a kid did it. Like that, this stuff is personal preference. So if you ever feel that doubt of I'm not good enough, or I don't know if I can do this, that's where the doubt is, because it is preference. That you're just flat out wondering, will somebody like me? Is somebody gonna like what I'm about to do? I'm gonna try my best for them to like it, but it comes down to preference, which is what makes everyone really have this doubt and this fear of whether it's going to be good or not. So if you're feeling those fears, do it still. The worst thing they can say is either do this to get better, or no. You say no, at least you can always say, I tried and I wanted to find out if I was good enough at this, or maybe I wasn't good enough at this.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're doing this internship, you're kind of building the resume and everything else. Take us through this transition of college Jack to I land my first gig, Jack Ryan. By gig, I mean actually you get your foot in the door and getting paid to do this.
Yeah. So the next semester I had, I had started fresh. I was on the course correction. I'm pursuing radio as my career now. And I changed my major, went into just like liberal arts just to get something. I was interning at WKPQ on the morning show. And I mean, things happened really fast there. Even though I wasn't getting paid for it at the time, I did a little bit later. Actually, after my internship, after that semester, I stayed on for another kind of half a year until I transferred schools, working part-time there. But basically my job was to go on the morning show and, in a lot of ways be a co-host. I talked with the morning show host on the air, and I thought, wow, like this is such a great opportunity for someone who's so brand new at this. But like they said I did a good job at it, and I felt like I did a good job at it. And it actually got to a point, I remember my very first fill-in day, I did the morning show solo, like 3 or 4 months, I think, after I started that internship.
Wow. That's
And I have
unheard of. It never happens.
I know. And that's what small market radio is so great for, because you get that exposure and that hands-on experience so early on. And now I listen back to those recordings and I'm like, wow, I was awful. But at the time, I was up here, you know? So I was there until I finished up and got my associate's degree from Alfred State. And I was looking for a transfer to a broadcasting school. Now, of course, upstate New York, you probably think Syracuse University. Well, couldn't afford Syracuse. So next best thing, I looked around. I looked at SUNY Plattsburgh, actually went and visited. And then SUNY Oswego came up. And I did a lot of research, and they looked like the best place to go. And I was right. You know, I transferred to SUNY Oswego. I think it was, when was that? It was January of 2012 is when it was. And my girlfriend, now wife, she transferred with me. She's actually from Central New York. So it was kind of a homecoming for her and kind of a new fun opportunity for me to move on. So we get to SUNY Oswego, and you were talking before about how you had like a friend of a friend of a friend who knew someone in Syracuse at the radio station there who was able to get you in. I had a very similar story. And this is something to remember too. Even if you're not looking for a career in radio, it can be any job field, especially media, but it's all about networking and meeting people and getting your name out there and just, not burning bridges. Like that's super important too, because you never know where it could lead. And in this case, I did have one thing going for me. My girlfriend, now wife, she has a family member who knew someone at the same radio station where we met at, who was able to set up a tour. So I went in for a tour, and I remember that I actually just got memory up on my Facebook about, it was like 8 years ago or whatever, 9 years ago, I think, standing in the 93Q studio and on James Street in Syracuse, getting a tour for the first time. And that is where I made the introduction with the promotions director to start an internship in the following fall semester. So I started there in December or in the fall, August of 2012. That was my next professional job in radio, was interning at those stations where we met, guys.
The one thing I've learned, and maybe you'll say the same thing here, is that when you do land an internship for any place, I know personally when I would hire people, if you're an intern, you get the first dig, like first shot at it. Like, okay, if you're good, you're good. We're just going to bring you on. I don't want to waste my time trying to find out who other people are and everything else. So I'm just assuming this. You can tell me if I'm wrong or it went this way. The fact that you're now in the door, you're interning, you're busting your chops, and you're hoping, okay, I'm never going to leave. Like Janice is going to basically say, if I work hard enough, you're going to be a part-time employee and you're going to be a promo tech live on location person. And it seems like that's where this journey is going to go.
Yeah, no, I mean, I still like, it was a lot of the same feelings that you described before, was just like, I can't believe I'm here. And not to mention the fact that those radio stations that they're legendary radio stations in Central New York. And honestly, it was an honor for me to even be asked to come on board as an intern. So like, the passion was really coming out, and I was just so thrilled to be there. And I would have done anything just to be able to stay in that building. And so I started out doing the promotions, going to the events, working the Great New York State Fair, doing the Saturday morning remote broadcasts at, anywhere. I didn't care where it was. But that was where, it just kind of, it took off from there. So that was the beginning.
Yeah. So while you're doing this promo stuff, you're kind of grinding, you're working your way, you're getting noticed by people, you're working for different stations, for different events. Since you're getting exposed to all these different stations, are new goals developing for you? Like, hey, I would like to be on the air. I'd like to host. I'd like to work in this format. What starts to happen with you as you're going through this learning process of, I guess, basically learning about the stations you're working with?
So, and again, I would say this about anything, but especially like specifically if you're going into media and wanting to work in radio, my goal from day one, before I even started my internship, was I'm going to be on the air on 93Q. And I told myself that every day, that's where I'm going to be. And once I was in the building, I'm like, okay, I need to know everyone in this building. And every single opportunity that I had to introduce myself to someone, I did. And I mean, it got to a point that by the end of the internship, everyone in the building knew who I was and I knew who they were. And I had a conversation with them, or multiple conversations. I wanted to be the person that everyone remembered and be like, yeah, Jack, that's that enthusiastic kid. And I was called that a lot. People would always say, oh, Jack, you're so enthusiastic. And it's not to pat myself on the back or anything, but I was just genuinely eager and excited to be there, and just fully immerse myself in everything. And I really think that contributed to a lot of the opportunities that opened up for me over the years. And eventually I did get to be on air on 93Q. And I remember the very first, I think it was 2013 when I started there. I started off on weekends. And around the same time too, I got opportunities to produce on the sports station. baseball games. And honestly, like, I like sports. I said I'm a big Bills fan. I'm a big Sabres fan, but like, I'm not a sports broadcaster by any means, but I did it anyway because it was an opportunity to, one, be on the air, and two, prove that I can do it. So I did it, and I love it to this day. And I've formed friendships from all of that too. So
Yeah. And just for those who are listening outside of Central New York, who Jack referenced 93Q, just give you a little background on that station. That's the number one station in Syracuse. Like, that is the top 40. It's been around forever. In the morning drive is a show called Ted and Amy. Both of them are in the New York State Broadcasters Hall of Fame. They've had an unbelievably hard to even compare run in that market. The middays has changed a little bit, but they've got a program director, brand manager, operations manager, all same guy, Tom Mitchell, who's had a legendary career as well. I think he's doing it for 40 plus years now. It's been the same guy. Again, very much unheard of nationally to have somebody be a OM for that long and a PD for that long. They've got Rick Roberts in the afternoon drive. Rick has been doing it since he's been a teenager, and that's not an exaggeration. Rick's been there for like 20 plus years. The nights have been different people. The weekends have had unbelievably different voices who have come through. But I guess another way to phrase this is, let's call it the bus stop station. So in other words, if you grew up in Syracuse and you got on the bus and you're going to school, 93Q would be on the bus. So if you're like in kindergarten or first or second grade and they're playing music and you're going to school, there's a really good chance for like 10 years growing up, you always knew what 93Q was and Ted and Amy and everything else. So that's what that station means to Central New York and what it's done over the years. So when Jack's talking about getting on the air, a lot of people want that top 40 format. And I think for you, you'd mentioned this earlier, that you were used to these like pop culture things. You felt that your interests would fit a top 40 format better because you were good at the pop culture, the movies, the TVs, the Star Trek stuff. And you felt, okay, that station fits what my personality is.
I, some of that, I'll be honest with you. A lot of my life I lived under a rock, even to this day. My wife laughs at me. So there are a lot of pop culture references that I do not know still to this day, and it's taken a lot of work on my end. And you would probably never guess that by listening
Never.
to
I
me on.
never would have. I've known you for a decade. I never would have guessed that.
But I mean, to make a long story short, like I had said before, that growing up in Buffalo, Kiss 98.5 was, I mean, their tagline, the number one hit music station. It's the same tagline as 93Q. So like I always wanted to be on Kiss, and 93Q is the same format and like same vibe and everything. And it's like that's the station I want to do. Like that's where I want to be. And you know, I gotta thank, you know, you mentioned Ted and Amy. They have been amazing mentors to me through the years, and they've been on the air over 30 years, still doing their thing. And they're in the New York State Broadcasters Association too. So they are just a fantastic morning show, fantastic people who, you know, I feel like gave me so much of the opportunities that I have there. And of course, Tom Mitchell too, just everyone in that building has given me such great opportunities, and I can't thank them enough.
You mentioned that you were on the air, you got the opportunity to be on the air. So take us through that process of you're working promotions, you're working live on location, everyone's starting to figure out who you are. What happens that, do you have to send someone something? Do you have to go through a process? How did you actually get approved to finally be a part of the on-air staff at 93Q?
Well, I had gotten to know the program director, Tom, and I was kind of asking him for a while, like, you know, is there any way you can make room for me? You know, it was a process. It took some time. Actually, Ted helped me put together my very first air check. So like there was some work I had to do on my part. I had to give him tapes of what I sound like. And he gave me feedback, and it was a process that we worked on over, you know, several weeks. And eventually, I started voice tracking on the weekends. And voice tracking is a way to kind of record your show ahead of time, and then it plays back later. I eventually got my very first live show, and I remember this too. I think it was 2014, St. Patrick's Day. And I was supposed to just come in and produce for Ted and Amy, who were doing broadcast on St. Patrick's Day at Coleman's like they do every year. It's a big like celebration, like St. Patty's Day celebration at the Authentic Irish Pub in Syracuse and Tip Hill. So I had come in to produce the show for them that day, but there was a window of 2 hours before that the program director is like, why don't you go ahead and do it live? And it was 6 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. And I'm like, yes. And the night before, I had actually been producing the Syracuse Crunch, and that game went until like midnight. So I did that, and I was like, I don't care. I got like 2 hours of sleep last night. I could barely sleep. I was so nervous when I went in there that morning. And I have a recording of that very first show, and I listen to it sometimes, and I could hear the nervousness in my voice. But that was the day that started it all. St. Patrick's Day. I'll never forget it.
So there you go, man. You're on the air. You've made your debut. Jack Ryan, by the way. So let's sit on that for a second, too, because I know you as Jack Ryan. That's not your real name. How do you become this personality of Jack Ryan? What's the process of, I guess we'll call it a stage name, an on-air name, that you've selected Jack Ryan as your name that people know you by now?
Well, I wasn't blessed with a perfect last name to make a radio name, so I had to make something that sounds a little bit better than my last name, which is and for these intents and purposes, it doesn't really matter because it just doesn't sound good for radio.
Yeah.
So I was trying to find a name, and I tried everything. I mean, like going through lists of people that icons in radio, icons and like everything, just trying to find names that sound good with Jack. And eventually I came upon Ryan because I saw a tweet from Ryan Seacrest. And I'm like, hey, there's a guy that, I've always kind of looked up to he's a professional broadcaster. He's got a great career. So I'm like, Jack Ryan. Okay. That kind of works. I think I want that to be my name. And, the bosses were okay with it. And then it was 2 days later, somebody tweeted me back or something after I had said that, hey, it's Jack Ryan. And they're like, aren't you that guy from the Tom Clancy novels? I'm like, oh, no. Here I am trying to find something unique. And the worst part of it is I knew all about that. The Hunt for Red October, classic film. Sean Connery. Who's the guy that actually played Jack Ryan?
John Krasinski most recently, right?
Yeah. Most recently, yeah. Great show, by the way. Why am I losing his name? His family's from Baldwin. Alec Baldwin, yeah. I had forgotten all about that. I was just so excited that I found a name that sounded really cool. And so at that point, it's like, I can't change my name again. So it just stuck. And I'm still Jack Ryan to this day. I still am. And I think I always will be. I did have to change it up a little bit though, when I took my next radio opportunity, which we'll get to.
Yeah, and I want to sit on this one thing before we get to that next opportunity, because now you have a goal. You're on the air. You've got a name. You're getting recognized. You kind of want to get a slot where people know you. Like when you tune in at this time, you're going to hear Jack Ryan. So do you have a goal, and do you achieve that goal at 93Q of what you're hoping for to get that time slot that maybe you're more recognizable on like a weekday shift 5 days a week rather than 2 days a week on the weekends?
Yeah, well, I do also need to mention, to put a lot of this into context, I was still in school at this time as well. So I didn't graduate from SUNY Oswego until December of 2014. So it was about 2 years that I had been working at the radio stations and finishing up my degree at SUNY Oswego. So I was doing a lot of different things. And so there weren't any full-time opportunities at that point. So I knew that I was going to be on the weekends for a while, and I was okay with that. I was doing the 6 to 10 on Sundays live for like a year and a half, 6 to 10 in the morning. And I had no problem with that. My goal was, I had my goals in small steps. I dreamt big, but I planned small. And that was advice that Byron Pitts from, I think he's at CBS News still, gave me when I went to a college media conference a few years before. And I met him and I interviewed him, and he told me that same thing: dream big and plan small. Really great guy, by the way. And so my short-term goals was to get it onto a better time slot, like Saturday. But someone was already on Saturday. So I had to wait it out. And a lot of this business, a lot of any career ambitions that you have, is patience. Patience is so, so important. Because if you're not patient, then, you may not be ready for that next opportunity. So like you've got to be patient. So I was. And then eventually there was a Saturday slot that opened up. And then I was doing Saturdays live and Sundays voice tracked. And that's where I was for maybe another year and a half, 2 years.
Real quick. Voice track, by the way, means Jack just basically taped his show. He's not in the studio. He basically
Right.
puts it on a track, and we may explain that in a future episode. But basically, he just puts it into the system. He's not. Sorry to spoil people who always thought when you heard a DJ on the weekends it was in studio. Sometimes because of technology, that's not always true now.
Right. And yeah, so I was doing it. It is what it is. I prefer being live because it's obviously more natural. But there are some times where being voice track makes more sense. But whatever the case, I was live on Saturdays now. So at that point, I'm like the jack of all trades in the building.
Pun intended.
I mean, seriously. So like I was doing promotions. I was producing on the Score 1260. There was one time I actually did the Syracuse football post-game show for about 20 minutes. I had no idea what I was doing. Not a clue. And I have a recording of that too, guys. I'll have to give it to you sometime. I think you'd be pretty proud of me.
All right.
I had no idea what I was doing. I was covering for, I think it was Mike Tricarico who was coming in. He was at SU at the time. I was waiting for him to come in to take over because there was like a schedule conflict. So I just kind of kept the seat warm until he came in. But I was doing a lot of different things. I even at one point almost tried out sales. I'm glad I didn't go that route because sales is tough. So I just kind of stayed in my lane and I chipped away at doing the on-air stuff, the promotions. And then I had also kind of taken on some responsibilities with the digital stuff in the building. So I was doing a lot of stuff with the websites and the social media. So, yeah, then I graduated college. And it took some time. There were some management changes in the building. And then there was an opportunity for me to come on board in a full-time capacity, and all that waiting and all that patience and all that hard work paid off until I was eventually awarded the midday spot on 93Q. And yeah, that was a great day.
Yeah, so people may remember you in Central New York now. This is about what, Jack? 2018, right? About 2018. What would you say was the year again?
I think it was 2016.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it was late 2016, I think.
Okay.
Yeah,
So you might remember now it's Ted and Amy on 93Q, then Jack, then Rick Roberts. So that 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. window is now Jack. If you were in the Central New York area, that's the guy you were hearing for that time period, man. So here we go. Full time. You get the job you wanted. You worked your way up all the way from an intern at the station to now being on the #1 station in Central New York with a full-time slot, 10 to 3. Life is good. You can't ask for much more. It seems like this is going to be the future. But wait a second. I don't hear you on 93Q anymore, my friend. Well, sort of, kind of. Take us through what happens next, because you've got a slot, you're full time, but you're heading out west.
Yeah. So I think, well, you had mentioned this before. If you listen back in one of the past episodes, Getting There, guys,
Nice.
he talked about how he left Watertown, where he was on the air, to take a promotions job in Syracuse, and talking about how it kind of felt like a step back in a way, but it was a big risk. So I had said in that, when he talked about that, just how much I related to that, because something needed to change. The wife and I, we weren't married yet. We didn't get married till 2019, but we were engaged, and we just needed to, something was calling us, something bigger, we wanted to try something new. And I think it was always the goal for us, because at this point we had been together for like 6-7 years. We're like, we want to try living in another city. And it was always kind of my goal to move on to another opportunity, because like in radio, it's very common to market hop, what they call, move around, get different jobs in different cities. And the reason why I wanted to do that was not to get out of Syracuse, because I really do love it here. Even though the winters can be a little long. I just wanted something new to challenge myself. I wanted to see what else I could learn, because I love this business. I love being on the air. I felt that I had done everything I could do in Syracuse, and I wanted to challenge myself and try something new. So I had been in contact with someone that I had met from a radio station in Buffalo, who is a SUNY Oswego alum. I kept in touch with him for many years, and eventually he was able to connect me with someone out in San Diego. And I think that was always the goal. I have family that live there. My brother lives there. California, Southern California. I mean, who doesn't want to go there? I felt like I was always drawn to the West Coast. And so it came to 2018, and the wife and I were like, after 3-4 years actually of talking about it and saying like, when are we going to do this? When are we going to take this risk? We finally decided that it was time to do it. And I did not have a full-time job lined up. And I do admit that at the time it was a little embarrassing at the thought of me going to my managers and saying, hey, I'm leaving this full-time job on middays on the biggest radio station in Syracuse to now move out 2,000 miles away in an area where the cost of living is extremely high, to take a job doing promotions and doing like maybe an air shift. Not really sure if it's going to happen, but I know that they were going to put me on the air in some capacity. And it was really, really scary, but I knew I had to do it because there was just something in my head just telling me that if I didn't do it, I was going to regret it. So the day, I remember I went into the manager's office and I said, I'm leaving. I was like, what am I doing? But I felt this adrenaline rush, like, oh my God, like I'm actually doing this. And I got to say, my last year in Syracuse before we moved out to California was the best. Like I was at such a high. I had done some really, really great events with some local charities, raising money for the local rescue mission, which was a cause very near and dear to my heart. I felt like I was the most confident in my job and in my role at that point. But I was still being called for a new challenge. And that relationship that I had built up with the folks in San Diego over 5 years, I'd been talking to that one person out there. Finally was like, okay, we would love to have you come out. This is all we have right now, part-time, but we'd love to have you either way. And I'd actually gone out and visited them a couple of times too. A few months before I actually put in my notice, I went out and visited, and they showed me around. It was like, yeah, we'd love to have you. So it was 2018 in June. We left. July, actually, 2018, we left.
I have a follow-up for you, but here's what I'm going to do because I want to combine it. I have the 5 questions that I'm going to have the most often asked about this podcast. 2 of those are from your time in San Diego, so I'm just going to push that to 5 questions. So before we get to the 5 questions, it always leads off with this, or at least I'm trying to if I can remember it, the can I ask you question. Some people are working in a certain job and they feel like they may not be able to answer this. So I'll just ask you, can I ask you about Ted and Amy? You could say no because you work with them because you're technically still in the building.
Right.
I'll let you get a pass if you don't want to ask about it. I'm still going to use this nice graphic if you're watching on YouTube. Favorite Ted and Amy story. If you want to ask, you
can. Okay. Actually, I would say my very first. Well, let's see. Oh, man, there's so many great moments that I've had with them over the years. I remember the very first time that I shadowed them on their show. This is going back to like 2013, I think. I'd gotten to know them because Ted helped me put together my first air check in the building. And I talked to them and asked them if I could shadow. And they don't normally have people come in and shadow them. So I'm like, wow, like, I've got it in, like, this is great. Like this feels awesome. And I was so nervous, but I went in and I shadowed them. And actually that was the day that I had gotten the nickname Handsome Jack before I became Jack Ryan, because there was a salesperson in the building that called me Handsome Jack for whatever reason. And so they called me that on the air. And after that, everyone called me Handsome Jack. But yeah, there are a lot of great moments that I've had with them. They're just wonderful people, and they're just such a great part of the community. So yeah, that's one memory that definitely stands out.
For sure, man. Awesome people. Maybe in the future, who knows? Maybe they'll be on a podcast to talk about their legendary career.
Yeah.
Second question for you. You had mentioned that you get the midday show while you're still a student at Oswego. Go ahead.
Actually, no. So I had gotten middays after I had graduated.
Thank you. I was going to ask, because you already got this job, you have this producer gig, you're rolling. Mm-hmm. Did at any point, because you were having so much success in your career, did you ever consider dropping out of Oswego because you already had a job?
All the time. all the time. And I mean, so I struggled a lot. It's funny, like people now talk a lot about taking a gap year or even not even going to college. Obviously now with the pandemic, things are very different. But even though it was expensive and everything that I did, I don't regret any of it. Did I need my degree to get a job in radio? Probably not, but it did give me the opportunity to get the internships because internships required college credit. But yeah, I thought about dropping out. I'm glad that I didn't. If I did, I would have regretted it because I had spent all that time and money going to school, and to just drop out and not have a degree, I would have been kicking myself to this day. So I'm glad that I stayed.
This next one is a personal one because I know you so well. Is TV an option for Jack Ryan? And I put in parentheses for you, weatherman, because I know how much there's tape out there if you wanted to be a weatherman. Is that still potentially in your future?
I don't know. Yeah, so I didn't mention this before. When I was at SUNY Oswego, I was part of WTOP, the TV station on campus. So I was working at Cumulus, and so I had the radio thing covered. But here I had this golden opportunity to try out TV right at college. So I've always loved the weather. Again, I'm a science geek. I'm just a geek in general. So I said, let's try out the weather stuff, and I did that. And I loved it. And I had actually thought about pursuing meteorology as a degree as well. But one of the reasons I dropped out of computer engineering was because I suck at math. So there's a lot of math involved in that. There is a program that some broadcast meteorologists have taken that don't require the math through a special program through some university in the South. I forgot where it was. So I have thought about doing that. Right now, it's not really in the plans. But you never know. I'm always open to trying something new, and TV is something that I've definitely thought about. So
somebody has to replace Wayne Mahar eventually. That man is a legend also in Syracuse. So there you go, Syracuse listeners. There's your next Wayne Mahar right there, Jack Ryan. I got two more for you here quickly. Do you regret the San Diego move? Because I kind of left you hanging there a little bit. Do you regret going to San Diego? What happened after San Diego, or what led you back to Central New York?
So that is something that I've thought a lot about over the years because I've had a lot of time to think about it. The answer is no. I don't regret it at all. And I'll try to keep it brief, but long story short, I learned a lot about myself in that move. And even though I was at a high when I left Syracuse, I felt like I did everything that I could. I didn't feel like there was room or much more for me to do except do the same thing day in and day out. And I wanted a new challenge, and that goal of going to California was just always in my head. So had I not done that, I think I'd be miserable to this day. Like if I was still doing the same thing, not because I didn't like the work or I didn't like the people or being in the building or being in Syracuse, but because I had a goal in my mind and a desire and a wish to challenge myself to go to the West Coast. So had I not done that, I'd be regretting it. So even though I moved out there and, a lot of things happened when we were there. It was a great opportunity. I was a producer for a morning show, the Dana and Jason show, who I learned so much from them. I was on Alt 94.9, an alternative station in Syracuse and in San Diego. And I had begun my changeover from top 40 to alternative in San Diego, which was super exciting because the alternative music had blown up by the time that I had moved to San Diego. And a lot of top 40 people now are moving over to alternative. And I just love alternative music in general too. So that was very exciting. So again, long story short, I don't regret the move. Things didn't quite work out. But I'm very, very fortunate that I came back here when I did too, because I was able to get back in a smaller capacity back my gang here in Syracuse. And when the pandemic hit, like everything changed, and a lot of the folks that I worked with in San Diego had been let go because of COVID being hard on the industry, being hard on a lot of media and radio companies. So I feel very fortunate and very blessed that things worked out the way that they did. And I've learned a lot about myself in this process too. So I have no regrets.
I feel like I know you so well. Usually, this is where I'd ask if I missed anything. I think we've covered about everything we can with Jack Ryan. So I got two more questions for you. One is best advice for younger people listening, whether they want to do music, whether they want to do hosting, college. Best advice you can offer some people who are younger who are listening to this.
Well, if you want to do radio, well, things are just so different right now. The pandemic has changed the industry in so many ways. And I'm not going to lie, there aren't as many jobs as there once were. There's a lot of consolidation, a lot of restructuring. There's a lot of changes happening in the industry. But that's not to say that you can't make it in the industry either. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for anyone to break into this industry if they have that drive and passion and they let it out every day and they let it show in everything that they do. If you really want to be a broadcaster of any kind, my advice is to use every tool and every resource at your disposal to make it happen. And the best thing is that you don't have to wait for an internship. You don't have to wait for, you don't have to wait for, getting into a certain, like you've got TikTok, you've got Instagram, you've got a website, you've got YouTube, you've got so many tools at your disposal that broadcasters 20 years ago, 10 years ago didn't even have. So the opportunities are there for you to break into a larger broadcasting scene. And the traditional ways of getting into broadcasting, I don't think they're really existent anymore because there are so many ways that you can break into broadcasting now. So I just say, keep your passion, keep thinking outside the box, think different, because that's how you're going to get anywhere in life, even if it's not broadcasting. Think different.
Well said, my friend. For people who have questions about your career, people want to do some follow-ups, where can people hear your work now? Where can they follow you on social media and all that stuff?
On Air with Jack. I had mentioned too before, so I had to drop the Jack name actually, because when I moved to San Diego, the producer, the morning show I worked on, they had a producer named Jack. So there were two Jacks in the studio, and that got really confusing. So I became JT. And so I changed my social media a couple of times, and then it just became On Air with Jack. So On Air with Jack, Instagram. I'm mainly active on Instagram, but I'm also on Twitter as well. So yeah, that's where you can follow me. And I'd love to answer any questions if you're interested in asking them.
Basically, Jack became Kelly from The Office, then she became Aaron. That's basically what happened to Jack in San Diego. What about On Air on Syracuse? Aren't you doing some stuff on
I am
95X and 93Q? What's the time slots? Are they all over the place right now?
Yeah, so I'm doing weekends on 95X, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 2. And then Sundays I'm on 93Q still from 9 to 3. So yeah, I just coming back to Syracuse, it's been great. And I will say this too, being away has made me appreciate living in Central New York even more. I loved it beforehand, but I've fallen in love with upstate New York all over again, and I'm really happy to be back here. I miss California all the time, but I'm happy to be back. And the wife and I are doing well, and we've got some other things that we're thinking of doing on the side, but everything's good. So it's a good time to be back in Central New York. There's a lot of things on the up and up. So we're excited.
Tell your wife I said hello. Tell my friend Chelsea, we have mutual friends. Tell her every time I tell her I said hello, I'll make sure I tell my wife you said hi. We're very good friends. People in Syracuse, say hello to Jack. Jack, probably the next time I see you, we'll be eating tenders from a place because they're not a sponsor. I won't say their name, but you and I will be eating very delicious tenders from a place very soon, my friend. All right.
Oh, so good. I can't wait to do it. Guys, hey, I'm glad to see you doing this here. Love your show, man. You're going to do great things. So
thanks, dude.
Glad you're doing well.
Talk to you again soon, my friend. Take care. Thank you for the time.
You too, man. Take it easy.